You know, most of the time that I'm up here, I feel like I know absolutely nothing about what I'm supposed to be talking about. So it is really refreshing this week that I get to be a little bit of an authority about what we're going to concentrate on today. And that is learning to keep our big mouths shut. And there is nobody in this room that probably has a bigger problem with that than I do. And if you know me well enough, you know that that is the truth. Now look, I will tell you that I have spent my entire adult life working with words, first as a television news reporter, then as a professor, and now as a pastor. In all of those endeavors, words are very, very important, and I've learned the power of words, and I've learned the limitations of words, and I've also learned that words can be incredibly destructive. They can destroy relationships. They can divide families and churches, and they can devastate a workplace. You've seen the results in your own life, either because of the words that you said or the words that have been said to you. And so when we get together to talk about this need to tame our tongues, this is something that all of us can relate to because it seems to be a universal problem. And James is not going to give us a whole lot of practical advice about how we need to tame those tongues, but he certainly is going to lay out the problem in detail for us. And you already saw that in the reading that we had from earlier today. Let me start with a story that kind of illustrates the sort of situations we often find ourselves in. One day, a young guy is working as a grocery clerk, and he's in the store, and a woman comes up to him and says, "I'm just wondering, could you sell me just half a head of lettuce?" And the clerk looks at her, and he's a little bit mystified, and he says, "Let me get this straight. You just want a half a head of lettuce?" She said, "Yeah. I've come to this store an awful lot over the years, and it seems to me it's a small thing to do. Can you just sell me half a head of lettuce?" He says, "Well, I really don't have the authority for that, so let me go ask a manager." So he sees his supervisor just down a bit, goes over to him, walks up and says, "You're not going to believe this, but this idiot woman wants half a head of lettuce." And then he notices that the woman's followed him over. And he says, "And this lovely lady would like the other half." After the woman leaves with half a head of lettuce, the supervisor says, "I got to tell you, I've never seen anybody so quick on their feet. After a recovery like that, you deserve a gold medal." The kid says, "Well, it's to be expected because originally I'm from Texas, and you know Texas, all they ever produced was football players and stupid women." The supervisor says, "Really? My wife is from Texas." The kid says, "Really? What position does she play?" Sometimes you can get out of it, but if you're like me, most of the times you cannot. And I've had some devastating situations in my own life where my words have trapped me because they never should have been said in the first place. And I suspect you're not very much different in that degree. What I want to do today is to look at how that happens and perhaps some of the things we can do to make sure it doesn't happen as often. By the way, if you're thinking that words are not something you have to worry about, let me give you a sobering little statistic here. The experts say that all of us, on average, speak about 50 to 60 pages worth of words every day. Now stop and think about that. Every day, you speak enough to fill 50 to 60 pages, and over the course of a year, that amounts to 100 books of about 200 pages each. Now, many of those words are positive. Many of those words are helpful and encouraging. But we know that lots of those words are anything but. And those are the words that we want to concentrate on today. It's really important to understand what James is trying to convey. So let me just hit the highlights here. He says, "Dear brothers and sisters, not many of you should become teachers in the church. For we who teach will be judged by God with greater strictness." And I used to look at that passage tucked at the very start of chapter 3 and think, that's a bit of a tangent. But I no longer believe it is. I think that those words are there for a very distinctive reason, and it seems to me that the reason is this. If you're going to teach in the church, people are going to listen. And after a while, you're going to soon learn as a teacher of any level of experience that sometimes you're going to do a good job, sometimes you're going to do it bad. And I think what James is saying here is that even when you teach in the church, your words can undermine all of the work that you hope to do. This is not something that he just tacks on here. I think what he's going to do is to contrast how God wants us to present ourselves and how we so often do. And those two things often don't bear any resemblance to one another. If we're going to teach, we have to understand that we are going to be able to devastate other people by the way we say things and even the words that we say themselves. And it's not just those who would stand in a pulpit or those who would lead a Bible class. If you are a Christian, you are leading, you are teaching in some way, especially when you're dealing with people who have little faith or no faith at all. And so I think what James is saying here is, yes, there will be a stricter judgment for those of us who take upon ourselves the responsibility to teach others, especially those of us who are teaching in an official capacity in the church. But here again, this has to do with our words, because they will either be positive and building people up, or they will be negative and they will be tearing people down. And then he goes on to say, we all make mistakes, and I think what he means there is that includes teachers as well. We all make mistakes, but those who control their tongues can also control themselves in every other way. We can make a large horse turn around and go wherever we want by means of a small bit in its mouth. And then, of course, he mentions the rudder that Darlene referred to. These small things have a great capacity to take care of things that are much bigger. And did you notice here that James begins by saying, if you can control your words, then chances are good you're going to control all the other spiritual elements in your entire life. And by the same token, if your words are not helpful, if they are not positive, if they are not encouraging, chances are that there will be other elements in your life that are also destructive. Taking care of one addresses the other. And that's why it's so important for us to understand why we have these problems to begin with and what it is that we're going to be able to do about these things. So whether you compare it to that bit in a horse's mouth, or the rudder on a ship, or a spark that begins a great forest fire, we all understand that the tongue has a great capacity for either good or bad. And we get to choose. That's the bottom line here. We get to choose. Paul and James and even Jesus himself make it clear right from the very beginning that we do have the capacity to do something about this dilemma. We're not helpless. We do have a responsibility, but we also have an ability to be able to do something about these mouths of ours that get us into trouble so often. And he says, the weird thing about this is that sometimes we do so much good with our mouths and other times we do so much harm. And it isn't right, he says, brothers and sisters, that the same mouth should produce both blessings and curses when it comes to other people. So the big question becomes, well, where does all of this spring from in the beginning? I want to take you back to what Jesus says. This is in Matthew chapter 12, and if you have your Bibles, you might want to go there. And he says, a tree is identified by its fruit. Make a tree good, and its fruit will be good. Make a tree bad, and its fruit will be bad. You brood of snakes, he says to the Pharisees and the hypocrites, how can evil men like you speak what is good and right? For whatever is in your heart determines what you say. A good person produces good words from a good heart, and an evil person, well, an evil person produces evil words from an evil heart. And I tell you this, Jesus says, that you must give an account on Judgment Day of every idle word you speak. The words you say will reflect either your fate that will make you justified, or you will be condemned. It's because of what's in our heart. It's not to do with this, it's to do with that. And so if we're really going to be serious about addressing the problems we have with our words, then we better do something about the wellspring from which it comes. And that is the condition of the human heart. And we all struggle with that, don't we? Look at all of the things that our mouths can do in a harmful way that we really don't intend, but so often it takes place. Let's just make a quick list here. I want you to help me with this. Let's just make a quick list of the things that can get us into trouble in terms of our words. Things like what? Lies, gossip, sarcasm. And that's why we have to spend so much time getting to the depth of who we are and what we really want to be. To root out all of the things that don't belong there, because if we don't, it's only a matter of time before they do come out of our mouths. That's how they get out of the heart. So we have to address the source, not just the symptoms of the problem. What are some of the other things we have to watch out for? Controlling words, that's right. Sometimes we think it's just anger and some of those terrible things that we can do, but sometimes it's much more subtle and insidious, isn't it? And when we presume to tell other people what they should do and how they should do it, sometimes that need that we have for control is expressed through our words, and that can cause a lot of trouble too. As a matter of fact, I would submit to you, at least in my opinion, I think most of the trouble that we get into with our words is because of pride and arrogance. We have a pretty high opinion of ourselves. And we like to think that sometimes we know so much better than other people, which is why we get into some of the trouble we do. And there is also the other extreme where we don't have a high opinion of ourselves. And sometimes that impairs our ability to be able to see other people as worthwhile. Because if we don't think that there's anything good about us, it's really hard sometimes to see good in other people as well. So we need to have that balance that says, I'm a creature of God. I'm a child of God. There are some things in my life that are good and wholesome and holy. And there are some things in my life that don't belong. And I need to root those out. But if we allow pride and arrogance to cloud our vision and to control our tongues, we are doomed to disappointment and devastation because it does so much lasting harm. And you've seen this at home, at work, maybe even in the church. We have to be so careful that we don't allow our ability to function well in our own lives, to make us think that that's a template for everybody else, because it might not be. Sometimes we don't really take stock of the effect our words are going to have. And we just think, well, look, if we say these things, it's no big deal. But it can be. You know, when I was a young man, one of the stories I heard that really had a big impact on me was about a little boy. And he said some really hurtful things about one of his friends, and his father wants to teach him a lesson. And some of you have probably heard this story. So he takes the little boy out into the backyard, gives him a hammer, a piece of wood, and a bunch of nails. And he says, okay, I want you to drive those nails into the wood. And so the little boy does that. And then Dad says, I want you to take those nails out of the wood. The little boy doesn't have a lot of strength, but he knows how to use the claw. He pulls out the nails. He's quite proud of himself. Dad says, all right, now I want you to pull out the holes. Get rid of the holes. Little boy says, you can't do that. And his father says, that's the point. You can't get back the words that you said. You can't take away the hurt that you've caused. You can't even make amends sometimes for the devastation of your words. And that's a big lesson for us too. We have to understand that we don't always have the ability to make things right. We can apologize, but sometimes the scars are lasting and they can do great damage, not just to our friendships or our family relationships, but sometimes to our Christian witness as well. Sometimes people can't hear what you're saying because of what you're doing, but sometimes people can't see what you're doing because they're too busy listening to what you're saying, and they know that what you're saying is not right. Can't get the genie back in the bottle, can't get the toothpaste back in the tube, can't get it back, period. Sometimes that is so hard for us to understand, because sometimes when we're angry, we just expect people to kind of toss that off and to forgive us right away and to have everything just default to where it was. And if you've had any experience in this arena, you know that that is not the way it goes. When we hurt people, it's really difficult for them to get over that a lot of the time. Lord, help me to keep my big mouth shut today. That's a good morning prayer, don't you think? Yeah, we can all use that. One of the ways in which I would encourage you to reflect on your anger or your boasting or whatever happens to be your problem of choice One of the things I would recommend is that you stop looking at just the triggers and you start looking at what lies deeper. Because a lot of times, what we think is troubling us is not really the problem at all. And the easiest example of this is anger. How many times have you blown up over the stupidest, smallest thing possible? Well, if you really stop and look at the situation, you soon come to understand that it really wasn't that trigger that got you into trouble to begin with. You're angry about something else. You're frustrated by a bigger picture, and you know you can't do anything about it at the moment, and so the least little thing sets you off. And so often we have to be careful that we're not taking out our anger or our pride or whatever it happens to be on other people. If we're feeling bad about ourselves, the easiest thing to do is to make somebody else look small. If we're feeling insignificant, the easiest thing to do is to make somebody else feel like they don't matter. And so often what we have is a reflection of what's going on deep within us that affects other people in a terrible way. But if we do have that reflection which says, okay, I need to have a good, honest look at what's really going on inside and to address those things, that will make all the difference. David says in Psalm 139, examine my heart, O Lord, point out anything in me that offends you, and lead me on the path to everlasting life. Be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to get angry. That is enough for all of us right there. If you're wise, and really, he's already spent some time saying, this is what happens if you're foolish. Now he says, if you're wise and you understand God's ways, live a life of steady goodness so that only good deeds will pour forth. And if you don't brag about the good you do, then you will be truly wise. And if you're bitterly jealous and there is selfish ambition in your hearts, don't brag about being wise. That is the worst kind of lie. For jealousy and selfishness are not God's kind of wisdom. Such things are earthly, unspiritual, and motivated by the devil. For wherever there is jealousy and selfish ambition, there you will find disorder and every kind of evil. But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure. It's also peace-loving, gentle at all times, and willing to yield to others. It's full of mercy and good deeds. It shows no partiality, and it's always sincere. And those who are peacemakers will plant seeds of peace and reap a harvest of godliness. And so what he's doing is he's contrasting pride and arrogance with this gentle, peace-loving acceptance of who we are in the eyes of God. Knowing that, yes, we're flawed and we have all of these failures and foibles, but still God loves us anyway. And he gives us the ability to reach past our humanity to the divine nature that he plants within us so that we can be true representatives of who he is, not just who we are. Really what he's saying here is this is a choice. You can concentrate, you can focus your energies and your times on the things that are bothering you, the things that trouble you, the things that cause you grief. Or you can release and relinquish those. You can surrender them to the grace and the mercy of God, and you can ask him to replace those things with things like goodness and godliness, with a great sense of love for other people. The more we root out the bad and fill the void with the good, the better we'll do when it comes to our words. But let me just caution you, what Jesus was always saying, and that is, it's not enough just to root out the evil. If you don't replace it with the good, then sometimes we're going to be 7 times worse than we were in the beginning. So it's not enough just to concentrate on those things that are negative. We also need to make a concerted effort to fill our lives with the goodness of God. And how do we do that? What's a practical way that you can do just that? Yeah, we have to know what God wants. We have to know what he's like and what he wants us to be like. And that does mean that we're going to have an understanding of his nature and his plan for our lives. What else can we do if we're going to fill our hearts with the right things and get rid of the wrong? Be with the right people. You know, it's Paul who says, you need to be careful about the people that you hang out with, because bad companions corrupt good morals, he says, and he hated the truth. We become like the people we hang around with. If you're around somebody that swears all the time, you have to watch your mouth, because before you know it, you're going to be imitating that same kind of behavior. If you have people who are toxic and negative in your life all the time, that will be reflected in your heart and eventually in your words. So yes, the people that you choose to be with will either take you down or they will lift you up. And you want to be with the people who are going to get you closer to God. When we're struggling with our words, chances are it's because the focus is on us. I'm angry, or I'm feeling insecure. I'm not comfortable in this situation, so good, and there it is. Whereas if we take the focus off ourselves and we put it on the people that we're dealing with, so often that is enough to make sure that we're treating them with the regard we should. And it begins with seeing them as real people who are just as smart and worthy as we are. You know, the New Testament talks about taking an interest in other people, not just being focused on ourselves. I would encourage you to do something this week. I want you to pay attention to the conversations you have with people. And I want you to notice how often they stop and inquire about you. Notice how interested they are in what's happening in your life. I think you will be shocked, maybe even appalled, to find out that most of the time people are just talking about themselves and they're not terribly interested in what's going on in your life. And sometimes when we sense that, that's enough to sort of set us off, and we say things and do things that kind of make us defensive or feel like we need to get our fair share of time and attention. So all of that plays together. Once you know who you are and you're confident in your relationship with God, in your ability to handle your good and your bad and everything in between, once you know that you will be loved and accepted by other people, your brothers and sisters, no matter what's going on in your life, that gives you balance and equilibrium. It gives you a sense of perspective and security you can have no other way. And then you have more than half a hope that you can say and do the right things, because you will be confident, you will be secure, you will be loved. And if we will see ourselves in a measured, realistic way, in a balanced way, then we have the capacity to treat others as we should, because we will not be so concerned about ourselves that we're harming our relationships by trying to elevate our own perspective and denigrate those who don't share it. It all comes together. God is saying you can control your words, you can control your attitudes, you can control what flows out of your heart by making sure the right stuff is in there to begin with. We have to remember that we're ambassadors of God. First and foremost, that is the thing that needs to sober us up. We are direct representatives of Jesus Christ. And if we see ourselves in that way, and if we understand that we have enough frailty on our own to deal with, then maybe we'll be a little more guarded. But we also have the great capacity for good. And if we will be the kind of people that James calls us to be, our words of wisdom, our words of love will eventually win out. But it's a choice. It's a choice. Choose not to drive those nails in the first place, and you won't have to worry about the holes.